Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the world you are. It was less than 24 hours from our previous session, and we are here again with the community. So it's so exciting. So welcome again to another session from Zero to Hero Microsoft Learn community. I'm Hamid, and here we have Said again with
Hello.
this great session together with Michael John Pena, and we'll be going through his session today about productivity ready Azure data analytics platform. I'm so excited for this session. So learning new stuff actually from today's session. Well, you can scan the QR code to join to the different channels from the community. And so since we are now technology focused, like Azure Zero to Hero, AI Zero to Hero, Data Zero to Hero, so you can join to the learning room on Microsoft Learn Tech community, and you'll see the different channels in there. So we'll have a little bit of kickoff and a talk about Microsoft Learn and the tech community that you are witnessing the sessions actually, and then we'll be handing over the stage to Michael. So Microsoft Learn is the richest and the greatest place that you can find the resources that you're looking for especially for the cloud technologies, and nowadays with Microsoft leading the market as a AI leader. And any resources, any training, specific paths, customized paths that you're looking for is the greatest place that you can make it on your homepage. So since we are all together on this path, so you can get updates as soon as they release it. So Microsoft Tech communities like Microsoft Zero to Hero and also other learning rooms hosted officially on Microsoft Learn, that the aim is to get together learners, professionals, experts, students, fresh graduates. So this is the goal actually, to get together, ask questions, share, come as a speaker and share your experiences. So from the community to the community, as Said always mentions, I really love this slogan. And as the next slide, do not forget to sign up for AI Skills Challenge. It's live, and it's the perfect opportunity to get to know Microsoft AI services. So you'll witness different modules within AI Skills Challenge and during the AISC actually. And at the end, you will get an official exam certificate from Microsoft. So this is really important to have a really great impact in your career path and the learning paths for the future. And as a last slide, we will have a short code of conduct. So be aware of others, be friendly and patient during the session, and welcoming, respectful, and open to all questions and viewpoints. So thanks again for joining. And Michael, you have the stage.
Hi. Thanks, Hamid. Thanks, Said. Hi, everyone. And, welcome to my session. And I'm very excited to talk about this thing because this is the culmination of not just Azure, but also data analytics. And probably a good idea as well is that everyone keeps talking about AI these days. Not that I'm against it. I am actually working on a lot of AI projects myself. It's just that some organizations, some people have an oversight about data analytics and in particular data platforms for their capabilities. And so today I'll be running across those different topics. Some of like really kind of like best practices, experience sharing that I want to tell to everyone across different areas of my consulting career. So I'll be talking about production ready Azure Data Analytics. So it's kind of like a landing zone concept that we've developed at Playtime Solutions. So all customers that we've engaged with were kind of like when we engage with them, they don't have to start from scratch and like click a bunch of buttons from the Azure portal. We already have everything set up for them so that they're already kind of like working on their business domain on kind of like day one, day two. A little
Wonderful.
bit about me and why my background's a bit interesting is that I'm kind of like the person who's been around Microsoft a lot, but never been inside. To give you a perspective, so I started as a student ambassador way back in 2010. Then started my consulting career, became an MVP at 2016. Then worked into kind of like my own startup since 2019, in particular around data and AI. Then I moved around in 2020 with ISP With that startup, I also sold that, then moved back again to consulting in 2022. And what's kind of like exciting for me at the moment in 2023 is that I want to do more of this kind of like community facing activities. In particular, I want to do a lot of these global initiatives. Hence, I'm much more active now with this MCP, MCT kind of like thing. So, agenda for today is that I'll start first with like what are the different challenges that organizations face, and what and how do we actually solve that, and just all in all how we go into AI readiness, right? So first off, let me kind of like start with all these common challenges, right? Like when I talk to different organizations, these are some of the most common challenges that they experience. First off is that I've mentioned that already, which is the desire to ride the AI hype. Everyone wants to join the AI race, whether it's within Azure or outside of Azure, and then they feel like they're missing out a lot, and in some cases they feel like they need to have a chief AI officer. They need to start their LLM journeys and stuff like that. Second is that there are a lot of business complexities and data quality issues that we experience in the data space. What that means is that as simple as like how do you format um, dates, right? Or as well as like location and all those different kind of like business domains that you need to understand, like how does invoicing work for this domain versus that domain. So all those different data are presented differently as well, and like there are a lot of those state level changes, and there's also like country level changes that you need to be aware of. Third one would be there's still a lot of manual processing and maintenance happening around there, meaning when you work with data in particular, there's still a lot of process out there wherein either a physical paper forms needs to be filled up or someone manually entering something, and then either that or there's still a bunch of like Excel files floating around, and so there are like still a lot of this process and operational challenges that a lot of companies experience even today at 2024. So we're those things that we've been doing since kind of like the 90s, 80s are still there up until today. The fourth one is that they also have a lot of challenges with gaining insights. So, and in particular, meaningful insights, right? So, what does that mean? So, that means that sometimes they already have a data infrastructure. Sometimes they already have a lot of databases around. They have so much data out there, but they're still kind of like blind because what ended up happening is that they just ended up with a lot of data in their data lake databases, but they don't really give actions to them. Like what does it really mean, right? Like what sort of like action can I do as part of all of this data? And lastly, and this is very common, is that there's so much tools out there, and like even within Azure, it sometimes gets confusing, like which one to choose. Do you use Synaps? Do you use Data Factory? Do you use some of the SQL Server capabilities, or do you use Microsoft Fabric? So a lot of those different kind of like scenarios come into play, and like those are like kind of like challenging as well to navigate, like which one is which. Hence, consultants like us pride ourselves to know, some depending on some set of like parameters and questions, we have some guidelines on which one to choose. So our approach for this one is that we understand from day one that things are bespoke. What that means is that every businesses are different, so we treat their data differently as well. So a lot of the effort or time that needs to be spent on this kind of like journey with data is that it's more about understanding their business and how platforms and capabilities can enable them, but knowing that they can't just copy paste someone's code or someone's infrastructure or data capabilities, right? So they had to, organizations need to build their own bespoke data solution, and that's what we are really kind of like positioning on day one. We know that even though you're kind of like in the same industry with others, there's still a lot of nitty gritty details that's a bit different than your competition. Second is that empowering teams with access to data and insights. So a lot of companies out there have already started hiring Power BI developers, which is good, right? Even at universities and high school, Power BI is being taught already. Same with Excel, right? Um, and I think that's really a good step because that means that businesses need more business, analyst people, right? Like people who understands their business, but at the same time, investing into data engineering, data science, data platforming, that's a lot of tasks, right? And also a lot of commitment and not to mention probably budget constraint as well, right? So what we want to offer is that how we address that is that we just kind of like work together with them in a way that instead of actually setting up that capability end to end, we just kind of like spin up PRADA.P, or in this case that platform that I was talking about. And with that, that means that engineering teams can just focus on creating their Power BI reports, right? Or in some cases even Excel as well with their Power Queries. Third part would be kind of like most of the time when like data engineering is kind of like secondary from application or platform engineering. Unfortunately, that's kind of like my experience so far. Like no one goes into kind of like this IT transformation or digital transformation saying that we want to focus on data first. Most of the time, they either want to do a platform uplift, like a lift and shift from on-prem to cloud, or they want to modernize their application, right? Which is like, hey, we want to go with a more rich application user experience. But it's very seldom that you know uplifting data platform or capability is part of that equation on day one. Based from my experience, most of the time, that's kind of like secondary. So what we do is that we kind of like cohesively offer that already. We're in like we know at some point when your Cosmos DB is already scaling so much, or when SQL Server is crying and you want to use that for your analytics, we know how to solve that. So I think that we experience a lot of this kind of like common problems, which is that gives us a really good picture of what to do when those occasions come. And I want to pride myself as a Microsoft MVP, so I'm also in the know of where a lot of these technologies are going. So I want to talk about this one, which is very important, right? So there's this concept of a data hierarchy of needs, right? Again, when you talk about data hierarchy of needs, it's based from the kind of like Maslow's, hierarchy of needs and wants. Wherein everyone wants to go to the AI deep learning space already, but sometimes they forget that hey, you first need to collect a lot of data, right? Then that means that when collecting data, that's usually a software engineering problem, wherein that's either through telemetry or ensuring that the applications can communicate to the databases or different data storage. So most of the time when you tackle data, you need to have applications first feeding in a lot of data, right? um, and most of the experiences out there are when collecting data, it's like it's either form based that you have to fill up a questionnaire, or again like a application, right, that just perform creates a lot of transactions here and there. Then once you enter to this store wherein you have to move data, wherein like you have to talk about OLTP versus OLAP, and like why can't I use my SQL Azure for analytics? Why can't I use this? Why can't I generate reports using using Cosmos DB? So now you want to enter that territory of like creating pipelines, data flows, and how do I kind of like parse all this unstructured data into tabular format. Um, and the third part is more like um, creating that architecture of validating, transforming, and like sanitizing data. When you enter this territory, most of the time it's a data engineering capability, and this is a bit scarce at the moment out there. And but the thing is, because of this gap in here, Um, all right, people start here already. We're in like what should like organizations start with hiring data science people or like machine learning engineers without actually creating a robust platform data engineering capability. So sometimes that's the case, and that should be fine. But the important bit here is that for all these AI engineers to be very effective and data analysts creating Power BI reports, sometimes it really needs to, you know, um, have that capability around data engineering. And so sometimes what happens is that these data science people becomes data engineers themselves, right? Instead of like performing those complex algorithms or fine tuning their models, they end up doing the sanitation of data as well, which is most of the time role of a data engineer. And same goes with analysts, right? With people who are Power BI developers, they struggle to kind of like get the data that they need, so they end up having in control to connect directly to the transactional databases like Cosmos DB or Azure SQL, and then they perform their own queries directly to those databases, and that's when sometimes it becomes very problematic, right? So how we actually kind of like, I think the journey towards all of this, right? To kind of like say you're kind of like AI ready or you want to go through that AI journey, in my opinion, is that the first step is that you need to have a reliable data capture. So meaning your application is really robust, it scales, your databases are really kind of like scalable, well maintained, indexes are right here and there, very fault tolerant. And if you have IoT capabilities, you need to make sure that they're configured properly here and there. So your kind of like transactional or operational data sources are really robust, right? You don't have to worry about doing backups or how do we actually, store data here. Yeah, or someone needs to manually set the triggers to, perform a replica and things like that. So once you've sort that out already, the second part is to kind of like focus on your data engineering or data platforming capabilities, such as like creating that insights, quality of data, governance, meaning like who has access to what, um, and then reliable data pipelines. In particular, if it's a a batch or a streaming or a nightly run or an on-demand run. And lastly is that security around making sure that all of these data are properly secured. And that's when, once you have these two capabilities stick, I think that's when you really get into that level of, hey, I'm ready to do AI stuff, whether that's LLM or, simple predictions or creating models around like automation or personalization. Like, come to think of it, right? You can't recommend someone a which item to buy if you don't even capture those data appropriately in the first place. So I think that's just one example of it, right? So what does it mean, right? So with PRADA.P, or how we kind of like set it up, is we've kind of like devised three three kind of like landing zones that we've developed throughout this. So first is we have Databricks on Azure, as illustrated here, wherein we kind of like follow that medallion architecture of bronze, silver, and gold. So I think this is again a very kind of like emerging architecture that everyone seems to be talking about these days. But I've kind of like been following this approach already for a couple of years, and it seems to work well. In particular, why this works well is that um, in your raw or ingestion zone, or your bronze layer, you want to make sure you have um, a good set of data captured from your source data, from your data sources, right? And you don't want to mix the transformation and the ingestion of those data into one kind of like pipeline, right? You want to make sure that, hey, can I get the data? Can I get the data? Can I get the data? So in that case, if you're using Databricks, we ensure that we have a private endpointed data factory that, within the virtual network of this Databricks kind of like workspace as well. So that means that, when you're performing all this source, when it lands into the data lake Gen 2 storage of that Databricks is consuming, they're all within the private endpoint, right? So you don't have to worry about this kind of like with how do you set up the VNet, all those key vaults, and like how do you integrate it with Azure DevOps and pipelines and stuff. So the idea here is that you just kind of like focus on which sources do you want to do, and you have a Databricks workspace for you to play around. So that means that, for someone like a data engineer, they can move those data from a bronze to silver and create some SQL warehouse capability using Databricks as well, which is also a supported feature that allows them to kind of like be accessed by Power BI. And then, because if it's Databricks, usually data scientists already jump within the same environment. So sometimes they already work within this silver zone, which is like the cleansed validated state. They don't usually work with the bronze from, from time to time. Usually they work in the silver zone, wherein like, hey, here's a validated and like cleansed data that you can start using for your data science experiments. Second part is that with Synaps, right? And this is a bit more comprehensive. So first, let me discuss why Synaps is a really good platform, right? So also a little bit history. So back in 2018, around 2018, 2019, when Synaps was just kind of like evolving from the Azure data warehouse, um, service from Azure, I was lucky enough to actually see Synaps work beforehand during the beta phase. What really stands out for me with Synaps is that first, if you're within the Azure ecosystem, it's easy to work things out to create this more complex pipelines, right? Second is that Synapse is, since it's an Azure service, all those kind of like capabilities of, again, the virtual networks, public IPs, using Bastion hosts, express routes, private links, and all the stuff, Azure Monitor, Azure Policy, they're all within that capability of Synapse, which is, again, very, very powerful. But it's also a bit tricky to set this up. So that's why we created this landing zone. But let me go into the details of how this works, right? So first is that in the source, there if the source is kind of like a data store, like let's say Azure Data Services like Cosmos, Azure SQL, there's within Synapse there's already a kind of like pipeline capability similar to Data Factory. And with that, there are already a lot of connectors and adapters that you can use to ingest this data, right? And the good thing about this one as well is that within Synapse, you have a lot of these capabilities around incremental kind of like capture. So, the common term is something called like a CDC or a change data capture. So this is kind of like how this works is that on day one of operation, you kind of like capture all the data. Um, let's say all the data, all the rows from all the tables of all these data sources. Um, and then kind of like if it's a nightly run or an hourly run, you just kind of like capture the delta, meaning the new increments on top of the previous data that you've already captured. So within Synapse, you have that capability, which is really powerful. And a lot of these are just using pipelines. You don't actually need to write some Python or SQL code to do that. And the thing is, because it runs on a unified workspace and a kind of like a serverless compute cluster, you don't actually have to worry much about the underlying infrastructure. It's all managed for you. But on the other hand, if your data source is kind of like streaming and something like IoT, you need to work with something like an Azure IoT hubs or Event Grid or Event Hubs, depends on how you want to do it. But the important aspect there is that you need to use Stream Analytics, so that from Stream Analytics you aggregate this and then pushes that to Data Explorer, which is now called KQL database. So with that, like from here, it's that KQL database have a kind of like materialized view or a point in time representation of the data that's meaningful for you, so that you can perform again this kind of like raw silver or like the bronze, silver, gold kind of like capabilities, right? And within Synapse, you have an option to use either a lakehouse or a warehouse capability. So within lakehouse, that means that you can use Spark and use Python to kind of like do a lot of these operations. And then if you want to go to the warehouse route, you can do you can use T-SQL. And the advantage of using T-SQL most of the time is around security and governance. So what usually happens is that the bronze and the silver, as we've designed, is that they're all within Lakehouse, and we kind of like use data lakes for bronze and silver, and then for gold, it's usually a warehouse, which is again a SQL warehouse, so that all those capabilities, like let's say creating views or row level security, column level security, they're all created for you, and kind of like easy to digest by Power BI embedded usually, or Power BI in general. So the pattern as well that we've established, that we want to use Power BI embed, that we embed through an AKS cluster kind of like application, let's say an Angular or React app. And the other bit thing as well that we do is that using Azure Cognitive Search, or now called AI Search, this business level aggregates can be kind of like indexed using Cognitive Search. Then for those who are working with machine learning, they have the option of actually using a bunch of Azure AI services or Azure Machine Learning to work with all this either silver or gold layer. And the beauty of this is that all of this implementation are within Azure, right? So that means that if you want to do kind of like a multiple environment, let's say a dev, test, staging, or UAT, or production, right? So you can just or not copy paste, but kind of like codify the whole thing as like a bicep kind of like template, which we did. And then from there, you kind of like just spin up different environments and like kind of like deploy them. And that from there, you can easily kind of like transform using Azure DevOps. How do you actually move from one environment to the other, right? So that's why most of this kind of like Synapse implementation that we've done are towards those who are more around much more strict compliance. Something like IRAP assessment, or like a lot of like really heavy data compliance that it needs to be within that region, or like sometimes there needs to be like a lock-in keys, or sometimes you need to do jump hosting. So that's why Bastion is kind of like supported in this regards. And again, this is a bit complex, right? Compared to what I'm gonna show next. But this is kind of like a full-blown kind of like enterprise-ready approach on how do you actually use Azure Synapse as your like and like let's say a really big enterprise deployment for your data capabilities, right? Then what we're working on right now, and what we're kind of like developing as well as an IP, is applying those learnings that we've used with Synapse but with Fabric. And you know we've been playing around with Fabric for a while now as well. When it was first announced, when it was in preview, and a lot of the things that were within Synapse are also within Fabric, but not yet all of them. And that's why we're actively waiting for a lot of those different features, in particular around those private links, some of those kind of like adapters, some of those nitty gritty kind of like specifics that we needed. So we've been pitching that for a while as well. But if you look at the concept, it's very similar. So within Fabric, you have the data factory capability as well, just like within Azure Synapse Pipelines and Azure Data Factory. Then same approach here. But this is a bit changing now with Azure Stream Analytics, and also we're moving this approach into something more around using Cosmos DB as kind of like a near real time um, capability for your streaming data, which I could probably talk in the future session why that's a good use case for that one. So that eliminates the use of event hubs or IoT in stream analytics. Because with Synapse real-time analytics, which is something that uses a KQL database, and that KQL database is also based from something called Kafka, which a lot of those folks who are in the data engineering world uses a lot. So that's kind of like have changed in there. Then the Azure Data Lake experience has now changed to one lake, and this is where it gets a bit um, less configurable at this point. We're in when during the Azure Data Lake storage time with Synapse, because it's not a one lake, meaning it's not one storage for the whole tenant. You can just spin up, as many data lake as you can, and just kind of like guardrails that or safeguard that within that environment, or let's say within that domain or within that kind of like team. But with one lake, this is a bit complex right now to codify. And so what that means is that it's setting up um, Fabric is more like a workspace setup rather than a bicep IAC kind of like setup, which I don't really mind at the moment, but I'm hoping that it goes to that concept of like a bicep or like an IAC capability as well at some point. Where it's going, or what the good thing about Fabric at the moment is that it does support version control. So what that means is that pipelines, lake houses, not yet the warehouse. Um, you can kind of like create a version control of that into Azure DevOps, and then what you could actually do is that instead of actually provisioning um, bicep implementation of what a platform is, what you can do is just create different workspaces within Fabric, and then kind of like Git integrate that to the kind of like I would say um, the templated Git repository that contains a templated version of Fabric. So that's why it's a bit challenging at the moment with Fabric in terms of how to codify them and kind of like create a platform landing zone concept. But I think it's gonna get there at some point. And it's also a bit challenging with tenancy management because everything again is kind of like in one leg. But if you think about it, it's nowhere different with maintaining SharePoint at the moment, right? Like SharePoint is just one big OneDrive for everyone within that tenant, right? Same goes with OneLake. It's very similar concept. The good thing as well with Fabric versus Synapse though is that because it's um, Synapse is serverless, but Fabric is more serverless in a way that there's even less. It's really a very ready-made platform for you in a way that sometimes it's actually shying away from being a PaaS now into becoming more like a SaaS. um, which would be really useful for even for those who are not within the Azure ecosystem. That means that they don't actually need to learn Azure to work with Fabric. Um, but again, those kind of like creates their own challenges as well along the way. Lastly, I want to talk about in Fabric is that with data science capabilities, you it's now much more native experience, and that kind of like tooling is improving a lot with Synaps data science capabilities. And probably one of the advantages of moving to Fabric as early as now is that a lot of the toolings out there are now moving towards Fabric. So meaning, using VS Code, kind of like all these shortcuts capabilities in one lake, like database mirroring with 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 a within the one lake. They're all kind of like the new thing that are really good and nice to have, especially again in that very big landscape of data. So when you're in that position already of kind of like a robust data platform, right? Now you can go into a proper AI readiness capability. So that means that, let's say you want to create your own enterprise Copilot or Chat GPT apps or something. So all of this data are now making much more sense. So whether you're using RAG or RAG, retrieval augmented generation, or you want to you're using kind of like a Mistral on Azure AI Studio. So um, a lot of those different kind of like capabilities, you don't like you're kind of just like augmenting those capabilities for you now. Like all those AI capabilities are just now augmented for you. You don't actually have to um, kind of like worry much about, hey, how come it's showing funny data for me, right? Like, how come it doesn't understand what I'm really talking about? How come it gets a lot of those hallucination? How come it's guessing a lot of those answers for me? So you can avoid a lot of those if you have a really powerful or like well established data platform underneath you. And that's what I advocate a lot these days, especially in the consulting realm out there, when I consult and work with a lot of this CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, that before you jump into this AI hype that everyone seems to be participating. I think it's really important to kind of like look back, or not even look back, but look forward on how you can improve your data platforming capabilities. So with that, we've done a bunch of this already with carjack registries. We've kind of like created a bunch of this kind of like ready-made infrastructure for them, and that just means that things are a bit more streamlined. Um, what ended up happening is that they don't need to worry about data engineering. They just focus on Power BI, and they kind of like create these reports that they want. And that just means that they don't have to think of you know how do we make sure that all these data are correct, or how do we make sure that all of these patient outcomes are valid. So they're all very streamlined and easy to use, and already with a good user experience. And also we work with healthcare, wherein like a lot of the AI stuff is emerging these days as well in healthcare industry. We're in like and this is very important because there's a lot of requirements out there that you can't just randomly generate data out of the blue without a really good basis. So that's why what we've done is that we've kind of like created some kind of like capabilities around ensuring that if you're going to connect AI into this, you have to make sure that it shows a score of like how relevant the data is. So again, those are capabilities that you have to have prior to performing all of this AI stuff out there, right? Especially when like real patient lives are at risk. You can't just second guess or double guess most of the time. So you need a really good foundation or basis on these things. Um, so with that, I'm gonna end now with my presentation, but I'm happy to take on any questions if there's any.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. That was amazing session.
Thanks, Hamid.
So great information.
Thanks,
We
Michael.
have several questions. Just gonna just show them on the screen. Also, the first one is from Tan. I guess he or she asked if they can have the schemas because I guess it was small on the screen maybe before.
Yes, yes, of course. Yes, I can also provide. We have an ebook version of this. I can just give it over to you guys, so you can just disseminate it to everyone. Yeah,
Amazing.
like I even talk in detail in that ebook, like how all of these are pieced together. Um,
So
yep.
we can then publish it in the community if it's also okay
Yes,
with you.
of course.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So the second question comes from Bushra. Do we use only MS Fabric tools for this?
No. So most of the time, again, decision points with using Azure in particular, right? Like if you're within that Microsoft ecosystem, decision points are whether you want to use Databricks or Synapse or Fabric, right? Those are the usual decision points lately. And some would argue that you can achieve everything in Databricks, same with Synapse and same with Fabric, and like they have different overlaps. And but where I'm seeing this is that from 2025 onwards, I think Fabric is more like positioned to be the go-to kind of like tool to use moving forward because it abstracts a lot of those complexities around setting up platforms and maybe because Power BI is just a very loved software tool out there, right? Like everyone loves Power BI, and like if you know Power BI, you'll learn Fabric straight away. But if you ask someone, who's Power BI dev and like tell him or her, hey, do you want to use Synapse or Databricks? They might even hesitate, right? Like it's not kind of like a familiar zone for them. But Fabric is kind of like going to that approach of like anyone can use Fabric, whether whatever background that you have.
Great. We have another question also from Bushra. It's before Fabric, how many tools were required to run this ML process to stream process?
Yes. So before Fabric, right? Like for example, with whether it's Databricks or Synapse, there's a bunch of and that's where it gets a bit conflicting at times. We're in because there's so many tools out there, right? Like you can in one pipeline alone, you can even consume five different services. There's this thing called Fivetran, all this Panda capabilities, all this data cleansing capability, data quality here and there. You name it. You can have as many tools before and after, right? But most of the time, the best practice is that you just stick to three, at least kind of like three. Kind of like zones, which is the bronze, silver, gold. Again, I talked about that in the medallion architecture, so that you focus on the raw, the transformed, and something. The gold is like things that you can already present to the users or to a Power BI report.
Wonderful. Hope that answers Bushra's questions. So if you have other questions, Bushra, you can also type in the chat. We have another question coming from Tan again. It's not clear for me how the data is cleaned in the different architecture you showed.
Okay, all right. So again, right, like I think the thanks for the question, Tan. But I think the most important concept around here is again the medallion architecture of bronze, silver, and gold, right? So just to recap, bronze is raw, right? Like let's say you have a bunch of Excel files out there, you consume a lot of like SQL tables out there, you put them in a table. So all tables and all files, again raw. But most of the time when I say raw, still needs to be dated. Like what date did you capture those files or those tables? And that's like untouched, whether it's dirty data or you know um, you don't format them, you don't perform anything, you literally just copy paste them most of the time. right? Then the second part is when silver, that's when you perform your transformation. So how does that work? So you have a lot of different options. So first is you can use notebooks. With notebooks, you can use Spark, PySpark in particular, and Spark SQL, or you can also use something like Scala to do all those data transformations. Like let's say you want to eliminate certain characters, or in some cases you want to format specific kind of like settings, or data structure. You do that in Silver. So basically, what that means is that your Silver is where data engineers are getting crazy with their development, right? This is where they spend a lot of their time, right? Like, how do we make sure we transform all those bronze data correctly, right? And they perform them in the silver zone. Then the outcome of all of those transformations, like, well, whenever they're happy to present that to the people who needs to access them, they now put them into a tabular format in the gold area. So most of the time, the gold area is again a SQL data warehouse, or in some cases, well, most of the time, it's really a SQL data warehouse. But in some cases, they skip the SQL data warehouse part, wherein they just create a Power BI semantic model straight away. So sometimes that's a pattern, right? But what we usually recommend is you still want to have a SQL data warehouse as your gold tier, so that you can still adjust that to, let's say, create views or perform row level security or column level security, so that you don't actually want to, just show everything to the Power BI um, users straight away.
Perfect. Thanks for the
Nice answer.
clarification.
Yeah.
Any
One
other?
thing, because we are having like live in cross platforms, and also we have like overseas on learning rooms, there is a comment from one of our members in learning rooms that Christian Robert says, looking forward to having a copy of Michael's ebook. So
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
yeah.
And
Yeah, we will
yeah,
share
and I
something.
think yeah, in probably few months time, we again, because Fabric is new, right? Like um, there's still a lot of features that we're still waiting for. But when those features are already kind of like in there, that's when we are really gonna go, hard with a lot of this, you know, with this kind of like ebooks, or kind of like customers. And what we recommend at the moment is that Fabric is worth trying already, but production workload, I still want to go with Synapse or Databricks at the moment. Especially with skills like, it's where are you gonna find Fabric developers out there at the moment? So it's hard, right? You need to factor in upskilling as well. But data engineers are already out there who are familiar with Synapse and Databricks most of the time. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
Amazing. I really enjoyed the session. Gonna watch it again. So
Thank you very much,
everyone
Hamid.
live in the session. So if you want to watch the session again, or if you missed the session, it's live and recording at the same time to YouTube. So it will be available, and then we will republish again in the other channels of Zero to Hero community, together with Michael's ebook, as he also mentioned. So that was amazing. And Michael, thanks for taking time. I know it's late time in your area. What time is it now?
It's 10:50 p.m. So
Okay.
yeah, it's
I
10.
usually sleep at that time.
Yeah, it's a good time as well because kids are already sleeping, right? Yeah,
Okay, okay.
Oh, okay. Okay. But yeah,
Really
thank you
precious
so much
time
for
for
the time.
taking time.
all
Yeah,
good. Thanks, Said. Thanks, Hamid. And
Yeah,
probably in a few months' time, come invite me again.
of course.
of course. We will love it. Thank you. And
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone
Yeah.
for joining, and have a wonderful weekend then.
Yeah, and one more thing is, don't forget to follow April calendar. I'm going to share the in the screen very soon. Have a great weekend and enjoy.
Cheers.